control. Sometimes my heart grows faint, and sometimes I fall. Sometimes I lose my way. Sometimes I lose control. But each time you move my way, and each time I call, each time you hear when I pray, each and every time you're taking care of it all. I've got the Spirit, the Spirit within me, His Holy Spirit. I've got the joy, down deep in my soul. I've got a feeling, a wonderful feeling, a wonderful feeling. I've got the Spirit, He's taking control. Sometimes my heart's afraid. Sometimes I cry. Sometimes I lose my faith. Sometimes I just don't know why. But each time you understand, and each time I try. Each time you're holding my hand. Every time you do the wonderful things that you do. Wow. I've got the Spirit within me.
The Spirit within.
I've got the joy down deep in my soul.
Way down deep in my soul.
I've got a feeling,
A wonderful feeling.
a wonderful feeling.
Down deep in my soul.
I've got the Spirit,
Blessed Holy Spirit.
He's taking control. I've got the Spirit within me. Yes, I do. I've got the joy, and I've got the joy down deep in my soul. Down deep, way down deep in my soul. I've got a feeling, a wonderful feeling. Over me. I've got the Spirit, don't you know? He's taking control. He's taking control. He's taking control of my heart and my soul. He's taking control. You see that? I've got the Spirit.
Hello and good day, everyone. We're back. So last week, in this bigger series on encouragement for today, we focused on hope, capital H, hope, as basically trusting in God as our anchor during storms and during suffering, and how getting through storms with Him can build up our hope in sort of a cycle. So we had more to say about that, and we're not going to. We're going to push forward to a subtopic within hope that we wanted to talk about today, which is a biblical understanding of treasures in heaven. So to start, I'll ask Kelly to read some words from Jesus in Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 21, and then verse 25.
Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moth and rust do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Verse 25. Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more important than food, and the body more important than clothes?
Thanks. So we'll continue with the same experimental class format that we tried last week, which obviously is remote video, and I'll kind of lead us through some scriptures and discussion questions, and then Kelly and I will try to work through it together in discussion. We are facing some technical adversity. Our neighbor is mowing just right outside the window, so sorry about the noise if you can hear it. Our 4 kids are in another room out there trying to entertain each other and keep each other quiet. so we apologize if they break in and steal the show. The video might be a little choppy for those various reasons. Okay. Another disclaimer. We talked about hope last week from our experience, some of our experiences, clinging to hope and learning from that. This week is not a lecture from someone who has treasure in heaven all figured out. It's something we need to wrestle with. What is treasure in heaven? How do we seek it and set our hearts there versus treasure on earth? So hopefully this, as we look at some scriptures and discuss, this is encouragement for today, for all of us, and sort of challenging and recentering with some practical considerations for the long haul in this life as God's people. Before we go further, if you think you don't have earthly treasures, please stay tuned in and keep listening. Likewise, if you consider yourself poor, we want to challenge that a bit. So the United States is relatively wealthy overall by the world standards. I found some information from CNBC, who cited a study just from 2018. So sometimes in the US, people like to talk about the 1% top wealthy versus the 99% as kind of a way to think about inequity economically within the US. Okay, but the nation overall is wealthy. So according to that study, if your net worth is $93,000, that's like everything you own minus what you owe in loans, then you're in the top 10% globally by net worth. So maybe some of us are there, maybe some of us are not. If you have a mortgage and you've been paying down your mortgage and have some equity in a house, you may be there or close. Okay, but not all of us probably are there. However, what do you have to do to be in the 50th percentile, like the upper half of the world in 2018 for net worth? Just $4,200. So that's like if you had a used car and no other assets or liabilities, then you're still in the upper half of the world by net worth. I don't know about all of us. Most of us have probably never had to pray for daily bread. Jesus tells us to ask God to give us our daily bread. And if we literally pray that verbatim, it feels kind of weird because it's never crossed my mind. Of course, for some people it does. But for most of us, we probably have not really experienced that, needing to ask for bread. Even so, it's probably a valuable prayer because it challenges our perspective. Like, what do we need? What above and beyond that do we have? And is it a gift or a hindrance? So to kind of tie up this, I wanted to use an illustration that we've seen from a different part of the world. Most of our lives we have lived in the Willamette Valley. But we have spent a couple weeks in the capital of Ethiopia, in Addis Ababa. And on the outskirts of the city, there is a large hill or small mountain called Entoto Mountain. And we were able to go there. There are elderly ladies who, to make a living, like to get by, they walk up and down that mountain road every day and collect sticks and bundle them up and carry them back down to sell on their backs. And that is their source of income. That is their source of sustenance. So for that labor, they make about 40 birr a day, or the equivalent of like $2, which is maybe enough to get by, maybe enough for like a simple shelter and daily bread, injera and some stew or something. But it's such a different world. So it makes us wonder, are we better off than them? Well, by world standards, yes, like it's totally different. But by kingdom standards, are we better off than them? It's not so clear. Maybe not if they're storing up treasure in heaven, or maybe they are better off. So Jesus wants us to store up treasure in heaven, not on earth. Related to that, let's read Hebrews 10:32 and following. The conversation of hope in Jesus' sacrifice, Jesus as our high priest, continues. It gets into this part, which carries us over to treasure in heaven versus on earth. So Hebrews chapter 10, starting in verse 32. Remember those earlier days after you had received the light, when you stood your ground in a great contest in the face of suffering. Sometimes you were publicly exposed to insult and persecution. At other times you stood side by side with those who were so treated. You sympathized with those in prison and joyfully accepted the confiscation of your property, because you knew that you yourselves had better and lasting possessions. So do not throw away your confidence, it will be richly rewarded. You need to persevere, so that when you have done the will of God, you will receive what he has promised. For in just a very little while, he who is coming will come and will not delay. But my righteous one will live by faith, and if he shrinks back, I will not be pleased with him. But we are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but of those who believe and are saved. Now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. So here again, after this long discussion, as it transitions into faith, it's talking about where is the real value? What is worth pursuing? Should you care about what you own on earth, or isn't it better to seek better and lasting possessions, rewards in the future, in a kingdom sense? Okay, so for the discussion, we'll kind of wrestle with treasures on earth versus treasures in heaven. First of all, what are some potential treasures on earth? What is a potentially tempting treasure?
You want me to answer?
Yeah.
I think that there are some pretty obvious earthly material treasures to me.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, Tarhas was just asking us last night about the American dream, and we were kind of talking about what that is. And I think that the big house, the kid, a couple of kids, 2 cars, vacations, those kinds of things are considered the all-American lifestyle and the ultimate thing. I think we're going to talk about today that it's maybe not that as glorious as we think it is when we're kids, but regardless, those are some of the things that come to mind when I think of earthly treasures. And I was recently listening to a podcast, and somebody was talking about this idea of the American dream. And she said on the list, she added a fuel-efficient SUV. So we recently started driving an SUV because we have several kids now. And I'm wondering if anyone has knowledge of a fuel-efficient SUV. I would like to know about that. I thought that was a funny thing to add to the list. I think that's an oxymoron. But anyway, other less tangible things that come to mind are prestige and compliments and accolades at work, or even a good reputation. I think can be something that we work toward building and acquiring, I guess, and then maintaining. And we can put a lot of effort into managing that and protecting that, I guess. Whether it's, our appearance or our parenting skills or at our jobs, from our kids even, or even our friends. I feel like, those kinds of words that make us like, yes, stand up a little bit taller and feel like we take personal credit for our success. I think that those are some things that can be considered earthly treasures. And it's not tangible, and it's not even really material goods, but it's still deposits in the bank of kind of the way that we think about ourselves, or what's important to us.
Okay. I don't disagree. Like, I think I identify with some of what you're saying. We are different. Kelly likes to get rid of stuff. Like, that is energizing for Kelly. The less stuff we have in this house, the better, kind of, right? Like, it's sort of true.
That's fair.
I, on the other hand, tend to accumulate stuff, and sometimes I don't even like it. Like, it can be burdensome or a hindrance, but that's sort of my nature, is to accumulate stuff. We have a lot of books. We have a lot of CDs and DVDs, and like, nobody buys those anymore, but we still have them. I don't know. So in certain categories, I do tend to get stuff. I don't know if I'd call most of those like prized treasures. I'd have to think, and like, maybe some of them are in a gray area or approaching that, but it's not like I'm obsessed with all that stuff. But even so, it still has the potential to be a distraction, or like to weigh us down, I guess, like, versus a nimble servant, or like unencumbered servant. Like, if there's the potential to have stuff that gets in the way of what matters more, the people in the house, or I don't know, doing good for people, things like that. Focus on God. So let's talk about money too. We have some money in the bank, and interestingly, during the pandemic, various people in America, including myself and like millennials, have gotten more interested in the stock market. And there's a few reasons. That the prices are down, so things are discounted, and it's, I don't know, something to learn about, something interesting going on with the pandemic as a background or whatever. So is that another potential treasure? Sure, it's a potential treasure or a potential trap. It doesn't have to be, I guess. But I've wondered if part of the deal is, like, beneath those things that I do recognize, if there's like a hunting and gathering instinct, like, things are topsy-turvy and things are weird, and I need to provide for us, so this is something I can do while we're sort of trapped at home, or like, I can learn about stocks and invest a little bit while things are discounted. So is it good or bad? I don't know. It's something to wrestle with, I guess. I feel like saving for the future or for retirement is wise. That's good. Putting your hope in the stock market is very unwise. Okay, so next question. I think I started to answer it a little bit with the previous discussion, but let's see what you have to say, and then maybe I'll follow up too. What are the issues with storing up treasures on earth? If it's a bad thing to Jesus, it's problematic to Jesus. So from what he says and from your thoughts, like, what is the problem?
Well, for one thing, your minimalist wife might get frustrated with you when you have a lot of stuff in the garage that she has to keep organizing.
Marital tension is one potential problem.
It's a liability. Yeah. I had to think about this a little bit more, because you're right. I am a person who I don't want a lot of stuff. At least I feel like I don't want a lot of stuff, but then we think about other places in the world that we've traveled to, and some of your examples from earlier in terms of what really is wealth. And I do have a lot of things compared to some of our friends, neighbors, relatives, other Americans. I'm certainly on the less is more end of the spectrum when it comes to accumulating things, trinkets, just stuff, physical stuff. But I think that can be a weight for people. I mean, it certainly is a weight for me, that when there are times, everyone in our family knows when we've gotten on the, when we have a little too much stuff in the house for mom. It's a burden. It becomes a burden to keep things organized and accommodate extra stuff and keep the space feeling peaceful to me. So it can be a weight and a burden to have physical things. Like I was talking about, I think for me, as I thought about these things, I realized that that image maintenance can also be a burden, and always needing to feel like you at least look like you're on top of your life and have it together, not just at church, but in general. Kind of the, if we talk about the American dream in terms of a house and kids and a car, then maybe the American dream image version is that soccer mom version who shows up to whatever the event with, the kids all look great and the right snacks and you're on time and all these things, and that is not me now.
It's hard to do. It's hard to do. It's hard to even appear.
It's hard to even appear that way. That's right. And that's been a change for me in the last 6.5 years since we've become parents. That's really been a big change, because I'd say that for me, the first 32 years of my life were relatively easy and pretty ideal in terms of our culture's ideas about what is ideal. And it's funny because the things that I considered trials at that time are almost laughable to me now. They were trials at the time, but now it's like, oh, that was nothing. I wish that was my trial now sometimes. And so what happened was those experiences reinforced this idea about myself that that I was strong and capable, and if I worked hard enough and put in the hours and did the right thing, then I would get the outcome that I was hoping for. And that was just kind of a reinforcing, I guess, that image and that desire to appear to be a strong person and to be a strong person. And now I realize that I can't really stake my security, I guess, on that image and that reputation and those kinds of values, I guess. And that's been a growing experience, I think, for me. And realizing that maybe that is a form of treasure, earthly treasure. I mean, in a way, I was treasuring my status as this strong, capable farm girl. And I certainly still value that, and I'm proud of that. And I also realize that it's not a reliable, solid foundation, that I have to treasure more highly something else, something bigger than that.
Okay, so you said a lot of good things, but I want to pull out a few key words in your personal perspective. Security, solid foundation, reliable, or something like that. So I think you're talking about kind of like image, I guess, or I don't know, earthly character qualities or something. Whether we're talking about that or like finances and possessions and investments and blah blah blah, like what things in the material world or in social life are really secure, are really dependable and trustworthy and a real foundation and anchor. Like there's not things break, things go wrong, right? That's the world we know, and there's goodness in the world and fun in the world and positive things, but things often don't go right, even with our best efforts. Jesus points to that. I think partly it's a practical answer. Like, things decay, moths eat the quilt, your stuff rusts, where I find, like, I buy tools, then I have to maintain the tools, and, like, get more cases and tools to fix the tools, or, like, just a house and property. It's, like, takes a ton of work to maintain at the same level, let alone like improve it, right? Because things decay and like the seasons wear things down, and so that is a practical problem. If our heart is in fighting that battle, that's a frustrating battle and kind of a losing battle since the world fell. So that's sort of like the practical problem, I guess, is with your best efforts, it's going to be problematic. It may also be disappointing or ultimately be hollow. I think about in Ecclesiastes the the writer, who's wise and was wealthy and had many experiences, concludes like it's all meaningless. Like anything I pursue in this life, it turns out to be like, bleh. That was cool, I guess. So what? So there's the potential for disappointment. We are transient, like we are mortal and limited, and things are transient. So it's really like focus on what's eternal and definitely valuable versus things temporary that like fluctuate in value, I guess. So there's a spiritual perspective and a practical perspective, and they coincide well. I have a joke, but I missed my opportunity for it, so I'm going to keep going. It was about jeans that don't fit anymore. You can write the beginning part of the joke if you want to for yourself. They're worthless. Okay, so the next thought before we go back to another discussion question is there a difference between treasure and just simply wealth and possessions? Are those necessarily the same thing? Like, is it bad to have money or stuff? Is it bad to go on vacation or seek recreation or enjoyment? Are those necessarily treasures? Are we supposed to be miserable? Well, hopefully we all are on the same page on that. And like, overall, this class should be challenging, but we want to challenge in the right way, I guess. So, no, God's created world was very good. The Garden of Eden was good, and God created us with a range of emotions. So I don't think it's a good perspective to think we should be miserable all the time, or that happiness is evil. It's just like, what master are you serving? Where is your heart? Which direction are you headed? And so, thinking about worldly wealth and poverty, like a person with lots of dollars could honor God, and a poor person could be obsessed with accumulating earthly treasures. So it's not simply that. Of course, Jesus does draw the distinctions, and it's like hard for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven. Meanwhile, he says in Luke 6, like, blessed are you who are poor, because it's somehow easier for the poor to enter. So I think the distinction is not that we all need to be poor, but for those of us who are rich by our own conscience, I guess, by some standard, we need to be careful what we do with it. We need to be careful what master we're serving. And ultimately, I think if we keep that straight and have the right perspective, that gives us a better life. That gives us, certainly a better focus on an eternal kingdom life, but a better life today too. Jesus talked about the pearl of great price. There's a couple little parables back to back. Like, the kingdom is worth everything. If you can find the kingdom, it's worth selling everything you have materially and making the trade. Or really, what good is it to gain the whole world if you forfeit your soul? That's another Jesus question that, like, there's no, like, right, it answers itself. There's really, it's not a good trade. So we talked about treasures on earth, and now let's flip it. What specifically is treasure in heaven? If we're going to store up treasures in heaven, if we're going to set our mind on things above, not on earthly things, we better understand what it is so that we're doing it properly, right? So that's the next question. What is treasure in heaven? And I'll start with Fern.
She's going to be distracting now for the rest of the class.
How about you, Kelly? What are your thoughts?
I feel like I'm saying this quite a bit today, but this whole topic is a little bit elusive to me, and certainly the idea of treasure in heaven is a little bit elusive to me, or a lot elusive to me. And I have had a hard time wrapping my head around it. And the first place that kind of my earthly mom mind and heart goes is that, like we talked about last week, that Abigail is there, and she is one of my great treasures, and so I feel like she's a treasure that I have in heaven. And then immediately I think, well, this is so much bigger. It's so much bigger than just my human mind can wrap around. That's not really what we're talking about. It's not, loved ones who have died or babies who have gone to heaven before us. And as I was thinking about that, this, I guess, is just kind of a side note, but really, Abigail is not the treasure. There's some other treasure that we both get to share together when we're there. And she gets the treasure too. And so does Fern.
So this one's tough for me. This is where I wish I could provide some really tangible and clear insights that would be encouraging, like paint a picture of heaven. And various people have tried to do it, I think, and we just don't know, or we have a very limited and murky understanding. Like if you look at Revelation, the Revelation imagery, is that an accurate picture of heaven? Maybe parts of it, and it's like majestic and awesome and foreign and troubling, and like maybe that's not really the point, or maybe it is. Some of the old hymns are goofy to me too, and I don't really get it. Like, I don't want a mansion. That's like a materialistic way of thinking about spiritual things. I don't need to be rewarded with a mansion, a robe, and a crown. That like doesn't make sense to me at all. And maybe that's tongue in cheek, or maybe it's like a product of the times when it was written, and it doesn't really resonate with us now because we're more comfortable or whatever. It's like a poetic attempt to describe something we can't really. And James 1 talks about the crown of life promised to us, and like that is a treasure, but I think really like life is the treasure more than the crown part. It's not about like jewels and precious metals and stuff, because even those in this world are problematic or don't ultimately matter. It's just a way to try to understand. So lots of those things don't really compute to me, but as I've thought about it this week, some things that do compute to me, like I'm not an expert, but rest is a treasure. Peace, like real peace and joy, sort of in like the re-realized Garden of Eden, walking with God and walking with people, that would be a treasure. To walk closer to God than like the closest moments you've experienced in His presence in prayer or in group worship or something, that would be a treasure. I don't even know what that would be like, but it must be good. I think thinking about things that are absent helps me understand the treasure too. The brokenness of this world is gone. There's not pain and sadness and evil and temptation or hate or mourning. So that's a treasure worth pursuing. But I think it's probably really about like fellowship of spirits or something, like to be in God's presence and to be together with those who love Him, with those we love. That is treasure. I also have thought that good a cappella harmony, like singing together, could be treasure, although not eternally. Like, please let us take breaks. Please, I hope that we get breaks. It seems like a bit much to sing continuously forever. I don't know, but a bit of singing is a treasure I could look forward to. Okay, so the answer is we're not totally sure, but like we have some glimpses and thoughts of what it may be or may not be, like inadequate worldly view of it. Let's look at Colossians 3, 1 through the beginning of verse 5. Since then you have been raised with Christ, set your hearts on things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. For you died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with Him in glory. Put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature. And there's a list of nasty things, and then there's a list of good things to do instead, which you can look at. in Colossians 3. How do we set our mind on things above? How do we store up treasure in heaven? We know how to store up treasure on earth, but more importantly, how do we store up treasure in heaven?
Time with God is one thing that comes to mind. And when I think about the fruits of the Spirit, I think demonstrating and living those out has to be a step in the right direction. And that behaviors in a heart that are pleasing to God would be part of storing up treasures in heaven. I've found that after the college years, which were full of enthusiasm and those kind of mountaintop experiences when we were part of the UCC, and you're going on retreats and you've got weekly devos that are just full of energy, and you're meeting with your peers and everybody's kind of, just jazzed, I guess. After that season of life, now in this season of life, and in the ones since college, I guess, I think that the real transformation happens more in the day-to-day living situations. So, for example, for me, with the fruits of the Spirit, some of those are not expressed as naturally as others. And I think that when I find myself in a parenting moment or a conversation with you or with a friend or anyone really, but really those kind of closer relationships, especially now that we're all home together all the time, and these are the core people that I'm seeing and spending my time with and responsible to nurture and really show the love of Jesus to. Whenever I can overcome it's not even me, whenever I can let the Spirit of God overcome my natural inclination and my human nature, and instead of that coming out, the fruit of the Spirit comes out, I feel like that could be a drop in the bucket of my heavenly treasury. That every time I speak kindness instead of frustration, or every time that I am gentle instead of coming down with a harsh consequence without kind of thinking it through, because that would be easier. Every time I do those little things, it's really an opportunity for God to be changing my heart and for me to demonstrate that. And to me, it's evidence, I guess, that I'm letting Him be in charge instead of going back to what I was talking about before, thinking that it's about my reputation of being able to be on top of things and capable all by myself. So to me, and partly this thinking for me is that that's really where I see God transforming me over the years that I've been a Christian, is in the fruits of the Spirit. That really is, if somebody asked me, what's your story of God working in your life? That's where I would go. And so I think for me, that's just where it's most evident to me, that I'm depending on God, that I'm letting Him work in me, and that when I do that, I'm storing up those treasures in heaven. And I think it's easy to kind of make the analogy with money. So for me, I was thinking about, it's kind of like investing money a little bit at a time over the course of your life. And I'm not a financial expert, and I don't enjoy learning about that. But I've learned enough to know that starting early and doing a little bit at a time over the course of your investing years is supposed to be better and turn out, you have more gains, I guess, if you do it that way than if you drop $10,000 in an investment account on your 35th birthday and then that's it. So I guess if that analogy holds any water at all, to me it can be like that, or it is like that, at least in this season of life for me, where I'm not doing these big crazy things. It's not like a one and done, or even a just, from one enthusiastic mountaintop experience to the next. It's just this slow and steady progress of daily interactions with people and letting God be in those and in charge of those.
That's a good answer. Yeah, so I like the gradual investment analogy, and in a few minutes we'll wrap up with another analogy that's like gradual and long-term progress. So I think that's a good way to look at it. It's probably not really about like a few heroic kingdom acts for most of us, but like, what do we do from day to day in the little decisions of life? And how do we react to whatever we're facing? How do we treat people? Who are we trying to serve ultimately, I guess? And it's kind of like self, treasures on earth, or others, and God, treasures in heaven. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of a lofty answer, but I think it largely comes down to service, like good deeds, and how do you think, how do you speak, how do you act, how do you serve. Kingdom growth, I think, is interesting to think about. Kingdom growth within us, kingdom growth in our home, in God's church, kingdom growth like globally. I think all of those things are establishing what Hebrews called better and lasting possessions. Mm-hmm. Like things here and now do matter eternally. Caring for people and reaching people now matters, and each of us growing closer to God, pursuing God is part of the answer. Mm-hmm. So let's look at 1 Timothy 6, a couple excerpts there that actually it's like very pertinent and answers this question fairly clearly.
Yeah.
I was excited that you found a verse that's like a pretty direct answer to the question. How do we store up treasures in heaven? Mm-hmm. So verses 11 and 12 of chapter 6, and then 17 through 19.
Okay. But you, man of God, flee from all this and pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, endurance, and gentleness. Fight the good fight of the faith. Take hold of the eternal life to which you were called when you made your good confession in the presence of many witnesses. Verse 17. Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In this way, they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life.
So it hits a lot of bullet points, actually.
Mm-hmm.
It answers it quite nicely. Did you have anything to add from that scripture?
I liked that God richly provides for us, for our enjoyment. Mm-hmm. That stood out to me, and I think that is fun. It's encouraging, and it's more than encouraging. It just is hey, God really wants us to enjoy what he's giving us. And going back to what you said at the very beginning of the class, that I think at the very beginning of the class sometime today, that it's not just about, we're not supposed to be miserable all the time. God gives us this life and these pursuits and these goals and these kind of endeavors, I guess, to enjoy. So the path of endurance is maybe long and sometimes trying, and also can be very enjoyable. And I like that.
That's one thing that stood out to me too. Reflecting back on what we talked about earlier, that being wealthy, having some wealth is not bad necessarily. What are you going to do with it? That matters. And the goal is not to be miserable. Like, there will be ups and downs in this life, and in the ups and downs, honor God, mm-hmm. and there is enjoyment parts.
Yeah.
Well, in the interest of time, let's tie this all together. So for 2 weeks we talked about hope, God as an anchor in hope, and treasure in heaven as something to be working toward in a challenging and encouraging sense. So how is treasure in heaven a part of godly hope? How is treasure in heaven encouragement for today, for those of us on earth? Here's one thing I've been thinking about in preparing for these 2 weeks. Earth in 2020 is a planet in need of hope, capital H, hope. I think good news is a real need, and maybe that's a message that reaches ears right now in the world, in those around us, in our neighbors. Thomas has talked about the groaning of creation and of God's people, and for those who don't know God, maybe the message of hope resonates right now because they're experiencing a need for hope, real hope, like not just a vaccine or some political election result or whatever, but permanent, eternal hope that is bigger than us and like that we cannot achieve through our best efforts, but that comes from someone greater who cares. So that's one thought. Sometimes we have this message of the gift of being saved, and I don't know if that really resonates with our neighbors and with our peers. Like, I don't know if they feel like they need to be saved if you ask them, but I think they might feel like they are in need of hope.
Yeah.
And that is something God offers through Jesus and through the Word and through us. So that kind of reflects back to last week, a need for hope, the real hope. What about from this week? How is treasure in heaven a part of godly hope? How is treasure in heaven encouragement for today? This perspective of storing up treasure in heaven.
We spent a lot of time last week talking about the anchor metaphor. And I guess that I have this picture in my mind of, I thought about when we were talking about the anchor, that it's important that we're holding on also. And I think I said something about that last week. But I guess that storing up treasure in heaven might be the way that we hang on to that anchor of hope. It could be the way that we stay connected to God, who provides the hope that anchors us. And focusing on some of these things that we've talked about today, especially, these verses we just read in 1 Timothy 6, that as we pursue these things that are of God and hopefully enjoy it along the way, we are keeping a hold of that anchor, I guess, staying connected to it. And the anchor of hope, I mean.
Well, thank you, Kelly, for participating, and Fern for participating briefly. Hopefully this has been encouraging and a bit challenging, and hopefully this is something we will all continue to wrestle with. I guess be on our guard, that we are using what we're blessed with properly, that we're not focused on things in this world too much, but that we are focused on serving God here and now and focused on where we're going together to be with Him. Let's pray and we'll close. Dear Lord, thank you for this time together. Thank you for the insight you give us from your word and from walking this world together. We pray that you will keep working on our hearts and keep guiding us toward you and toward eternity with you. Thank you for that promise. Thank you for all the hope that you offer through your Son. And we pray for a healthy, thriving, growing kingdom in each of us and in this world, that increasingly people will look to you for hope and salvation. Please guide your church. In Jesus' name, amen. Thanks, Kelly, and take care, everyone.
He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. Our God is awesome. He reigns from heaven with wisdom, power, and wisdom. Our God is an awesome God.
Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, love. Our God is an awesome God. Now when he rolled up his sleeves, he wasn't putting on the Ritz.
Our God is an awesome God.
There's thunder in his footsteps, lightning in his fist.
Our God is an awesome God.
And the Lord wasn't joking when he kicked him out of Eden. It wasn't for no reason that he shed his blood. His return is very soon, and so you better be believing.
Our God is an awesome God.
Yes, we know that he's awesome.
He's awesome.
And he reigns with power and wisdom.
Our God is an awesome God.
And we know that he's awesome.
God is awesome.
And he reigns with power and wisdom.
Our God is an awesome God.
Now when the sky was starless in the void of the night,
Our God is an awesome God.
he spoke into the darkness and created the light.
Our God is an awesome God.
The judgment and wrath he poured out on Sodom, his mercy and grace he gave us at the cross. I hope that we have not too quickly forgotten that
Our God is an awesome God.
yes, we know that he's awesome. And he reigns with power and wisdom.
Our God is an awesome God.
And we know that he's awesome. And he reigns with power and wisdom.
Our God is an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God.
Yes, we know that he's awesome. And he reigns with power and wisdom.
Our God is an awesome God.
And we know that he's awesome. And he reigns with power and wisdom. Our God is an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God. Our God is an awesome
Hide me away, O Lord.
Hide me away, O Lord.
Give me your peace, O Lord.
Give me your peace, O Lord.
Give me your peace, O Lord.
Give me